The story begins with someone approaching a gentleman and informing him that this is the last room. A group of 4 people stood at the large door. The same gentleman, a blond man with blue eyes, was glad they had finally reached it. Greenville was an S-rank dungeon. No one has been able to clear it yet, and no hero who has risked trying has returned home unscathed. The Lord confidently mentally declares that it is the most sinister dungeon, but their team received information from a woman they met on their way to the dungeon, and they were able to reach the last room with ease. They were incredibly lucky. The girl they met was wearing a brown robe and hiding her face under a hood. Walking up to the door and placing his hand on it, pushing the door open, the master added, well, now they would see what was in the last room of the S-rank dungeon. As they passed into the room, the gentleman was puzzled as to what was before them. They found themselves in a huge hall with a red carpet and were surprised to find it empty. The girl they met along the way took off her hood and said that he was right, for this place could not be called a treasure house. After throwing off her cloak, the girl appeared with purple hair, wings, and a tail. She stated that he had entered the arena of the last boss of the Greenville dungeon. The girl is a succubus named Adelaide. The gentleman with the sword was clearly surprised that it was a succubus. He realized that she had tricked them by pretending to be an ordinary passerby. The Lord immediately felt the power of the succubus and began to cough, covering his mouth with his hand. He took stock of the fact that she was only a succubus, but she was so strong. The team settled to the floor from Adelaide's succubus power. They asked her who she was. Adelaide smirked and asked who she was. The girl smiled and cheerfully snapped her fingers and replied that she was the mistress of this place. Sparks flew across the hall, which inflicted horrible wounds on the squad. Dead bodies lay in pools of blood. Adelaide rejoiced and told the souls to go to her, to Mommy. A notification has appeared that the number of eliminated heroes has increased. At the moment, the number of heroes eliminated by Adelaide is 234,352. The rank of the dungeon is S. The owner of the dungeon is accordingly Adelaide. The girl was very happy because everything is great and her plan for today is fulfilled. The girl noticed that today's catch was excellent and thought about whether she should go again or not. Suddenly, someone appeared in the hall and asked Adelaide what this tedious activity was all about. How many times was he going to tell her she shouldn't do it? It was a young man, Caladium. He is the immorality demon of the Greenville dungeon. Succubus Adelaide immediately flew up to him, addressing him as Kaladi and saying he was just in time. She noticed that she had been working a bit and was tired. So she pulled the guy to her by his shirt and pressed her breasts against his and asked him if instead of resenting him, he would kiss her. They melded together in a kiss. Caladium mooed with pleasure. He put his hand on her waist, embracing her and squeezing her a little. The girl loved what Caladium was doing to her. The guys pulled away from each other and Caladium scolded, saying that Adelaide was serious. He tried to catch his breath. Suddenly, someone grabbed Adelaide by the arm and pulled her away from Caladium, addressing her as Mistress Adelaide. He threw a red cloak over her shoulders. The girl raised her head and looked at the man behind her back. She addressed him as Lishan. He bowed to the girl and told her that he had done a great job today. Lysianthus is a demon of the Greenville dungeon. The girl struck up a sweet conversation with Lysianthus, telling him that once again these knights had decided to pay a visit. The demon replied to her that she was unbelievable. Caladium watched them talk and was clearly annoyed as hell. She turned to bloody Lysianthus and started to ask him, yeah, how dare he? Someone suddenly addressed Adelaide, calling her Adele. It was Lufinos, a knight of the Greenville dungeon, who asked the girl if she had decided to take a walk today. The girl ran up to the knight, addressing him as Luffy and asking him how he was. The knight put his hand on the girl's waist. Lufinos replied that everything was fine. He was just worried about her. He asked the girl if she was all right, if anything was bothering her. He knows she's busy, but her health should be monitored too. Caladium was terribly annoyed and approached Lufinos, saying that he may be in a hurry, but you have to respect the line. Caladium stated that he was looking out for her today, and in general he was her favorite, so no need to piss him off. Lufinos asked Caladium what made him think that. Since that time, he had a fantasy. Caladium replied that, of course, Adele had made up her mind and that Lufinos was just a doormat for her. He should know his place. Lufinos replied that Caladium was being paranoid as usual. Watching them, Adelaide thought about how, as soon as they met, they would immediately start fighting. The girl grabbed the two of them with her hands, drawing their attention and telling them to stop fighting, and she would pay attention. She clarified with them, for they had decided that they were going to spend time together, right? She made an embarrassed face and added that it was because she liked the whole trio of them so much. Caladium blushed at her words, and so did Lufinos. Caladium made a serious voice and added that it was fine since Adelaide wanted it that way, but he was still her main lover. Lysianzus implied that was correct, and the mistress's decision was law to them. Lufinos added that it was fine with him if that's what Adele wanted. Adele glowed with happiness and replied that it was the right thing to do and that they should all live together. To herself, the girl thought about how easy they were to tame. Beautiful supreme demons, a legendary knight, and an S-rank dungeon. Adelaide wasn't always the mistress of it all. Grabbing Lufinos and Caladium under her arms, she galloped merrily along, with a peaceful Lysianzus trailing behind them. Only a few months ago, the girl lived each day with the thought that it could be her last. She remembered the situation a few months ago in the Morpheus Tower Succubus Alliance. Someone called Adelita first by her full name, then by her abbreviated name, like Adele. The girl was lying in bed, hugging the blanket. She was sleeping sweetly, oblivious to her surroundings. Someone hung on her and suddenly shouted at her to get up. The girl immediately woke up and started screaming. A woman stood by her bedside. Trembling, Adelaide asked her, addressing her as Peepa, if she had come here after work. The girl stood, resting her arms at her sides and stating that yes, she had treated another knight today. She grabbed Adelaide's hand, telling her that she could use some work too, instead of lying there sleeping all day. She asked Adelaide to look at her frail arms, for how much energy this body hadn't seen. Adelaide grimaced at the comment that she just didn't think succubus work was right for her. She was dumbfounded by the words, and asked again if Adelaide was sure she didn't think so. The woman immediately dragged Adele to the floor and placed her right in front of the mirror, telling her to look in it. She asked Adele to look at her face and her body. The woman was outraged that she was stating that how is she saying that she is not suited to be a succubus? Adelaide embarrassedly replied that she was indeed right, but she wanted to live as a magical creature from fairy tales. As Adelaide imagines it, all day long nothing but entertainment, the adulation of people. The woman apologized to her, but life is not a fairy tale, and unfortunately she is a succubus and must live the life of a succubus. That's not how it all works, after all. If she does not eat, she will die. 5 souls a month are needed. Must be sure to pay tax to the union. Homeless throughout her life. Adelaide tearfully stated that she did not want to. The woman exhaled heavily, and turning to Adele said, "She doesn't think you are lazy, but she knows that if she doesn't work, she'll be expelled from the union, and most loners usually starve to death. Besides, she should think for herself, 30 years old. For 30 whole years, she's been on vacation. The head of the union, Maximilian, is just waiting for the right moment to kick her out." Adelaide asked Peepa to stop worrying so much already. Actually, Mr. Maximilian likes her, so how could he kick her out? A moment later, Adelaide found herself outside the castle, sitting on the ground. She was addressed as the succubus Adelaide, informing her that by order of the head of Maximilian, she is banished from the alliance as of today. She should get out now. The gate slammed in the girl's face. She couldn't believe it and finally snickered that it couldn't be. She screamed indignantly. Did they mean to tell her that she had to be in this horrible place again? The girl pounded on the door with her fists. She may not have been doing the succubus's job properly, but she was still doing something. Come to think of it, the first thing Adelaide did was sleep and breathe dust. The second was eat and leave behind dirty dishes. Is it possible to throw it away as if it were an old, worn pair of boots? The girl thought indignantly. She was on her knees and banging on the wooden gate, screaming for them to open the door for her. She tells them to open it, because you can't just throw her out of here like that. Suddenly, an elderly man appeared behind her, asking if the girl was Mrs. Adelaide from Morpheus. The girl incredulously started to turn around, saying that yes, Adelaide was her, but who was this old man? The old man asked her not to be frightened and, introducing himself as Jamie, said he was just a lawyer. He added that the reason he had come to see her was the inheritance. Jamie narrates that her grandfather Harbase named her his sole heir. The papers appeared in her hands. She was surprised to hear about her grandfather, for she had never met a relative. The property she is inheriting is 1 dungeon, and she can read more details in the deed. Jamie added that if she wasn't interested, she could decline. Adele immediately flew up to the lawyer and confidently stated that she was accepting the inheritance. It was her beloved grandfather's, all true. The lawyer continued that in such a case she had to sign. The girl immediately showed him the documents, saying that everything was ready. Jamie remarked that very quickly, and in such a case he confirms that the property formerly belonged to Mr. Harbese is now the property of the Lady Adelaide. As that was the end of his work, she departed. With a wave of his brown cloak, Jamie's lawyer disappeared, wishing Adele all the best. The girl sat on the ground, holding the very papers in her hands. She wondered if he had just said his best to her. The girl clutched the paper, and the bird beside her even grew nervous. Adelaide shook herself. Suddenly the girl glowed and said that she was now the mistress of the dungeon, so of course she would have all the best. It was the dream of all the denizens of the underworld. She remembered a guy saying that it would be so cool if he was a rich man's heir. A girl had asked him if he'd read too many fairy tales. Everybody wants an inheritance. One guy said that he just wanted to run at least 1 dungeon. Another guy told him that it's just a pipe dream and only a select few are worthy of such an honor. That's the best way to make money in their world. A dungeon. Adelaide couldn't believe that she had really become mistress of the dungeon. She sat on her throne and laughed. She didn't know where her grandfather had gotten her from, but she was eternally grateful to him. Well, then it was time for her to see what the dungeon was all about. The papers stated that Greenville Dungeon, rank F, number of inhabitants 0, location Croniton, Sarman, and the heir, must reimburse the previous owner's debt of 666 gold coins. Seeing the information that the heir must repay the debt, the girl didn't realize if it was her, what it even was. She counted once more. It said 3 6s. Adelaide screamed in horror about those 666 gold coins. The girl jumped up, shouting that it couldn't be, because there was no mention of debt. Adelaide remembered that even capable succubi like Penelope, Pipa, could only save 1 gold coin a year. So how could she get 666? She was sure to be caught and skinned for not paying that kind of debt. She squeezed the paper tighter and said, "Damn it," and called the lawyer to come back because it was fraud. Adelaide shared the whole story that had happened with Penelope. Penelope aggressively stated that she had told her to plow. Since they had banished her from the Alliance, she would now be prey to small magical creatures. She also asked what her inheritance was. Penelope asked Adele what would have happened if she hadn't come. Penelope was the one who bought Adelaide something to eat. The girl thanked Pippi. Penelope said to tell Adele already what happened to the dungeon she inherited. How did it happen? Adelaide thought about the fact that it was impossible for Pippa to know that she had become the owner of such a large debt. In her hearing, she declared that it was only an F-rank dungeon. Penelope grabbed Adelaide's cheek and pulled it away. She said that Adelaide should be grateful even for that. For now, at least she would have a place to live. Penelope inquired where it was, if it was in Croniton. Adelaide replied that Sarman was in Croniton, near Marfu in the southern part. The opposite side of here, it would be hard to see each other often. Penelope exhaled heavily and tossed a bag of money into Adelaide's hands, telling her to take it. Adelaide wondered what she was getting the money for. Penelope wondered if she was going to walk after she passed through the gate, as she needed money for the journey. Adelaide thanked her with a sob. Penelope looked at the guide to the gate and told her to go quickly, for she had so far to go. At parting, she shouted to her that if she became a successful dungeon mistress, let her get a job later and let her get ready right away. That Penelope was expensive. Adelaide shouted back that yes, she understood. Adelaide said confidently that she would have full employee benefits and that she would only work once a week and the food would be the best. Penelope happily replied, "Isn't there such a job in the world?" Adelaide confidently thought about the fact that she would work very hard to thank her. She would make this dungeon reach S rank. Hearing the sound of her rumbling stomach and realized that no, she wouldn't make it. She knew, of course, that she would have a long ride, but she didn't think it was that far. She'd arrived by Ladybug, but it still took a quarter of a day, and she still couldn't find the entrance. She wondered if she would be able to develop a decent dungeon in such a wilderness. She remembered the words Penelope had said to her last. She started hitting herself on her cheek, asking to come to her senses. She couldn't disappoint Peepa again. She unfolded the map and said confidently that the first thing to do was to pull herself together and try to find the entrance. She feels like the map had this area on it. Suddenly she stepped on some strange area, and it widened as she stood on it. She realized that she had found it, and it was the entrance to the dungeon, so it was too early for her to die. She mentally declared that this was her sweet home, even if it was just a rank F dungeon with a lot of debts, but just as long as they weren't ruined. She squeezed her eyes shut, and when she opened them, she had already moved to a room in the dungeon. She was surprised and didn't realize what it was. She found herself in such a cozy living room, a clean kitchen, and the place is pretty much just fine. Adelaide jumped for joy. Since this is an F-rank dungeon, there are only 4 rooms here, but it's good that it's not some underground cave. Jumping for joy, Adelaide added that it was so lucky that her grandfather was a pretty neat man. She thought she should probably look around a bit. When she opened the door to one of the rooms, she saw a man standing by the window. He turned toward her. Adelaide was surprised and mentally wondered who it was. She assumed it was probably an invader. Suddenly, this guy asked if the girl was the owner. The girl replied that no, she was the owner of the dungeon. The young man repeated after the girl that she is the mistress of the dungeon means. He put his hand on his heart and said that means she is his mistress too. He crouched down on one knee and said to introduce himself properly. His name is Lysianzus, and he is the steward of Greenville. He is honored to meet her, the mistress. Adelaide was dumbfounded to hear that he was the steward. She mentally wondered how it was that an F-rank dungeon that didn't even generate income had a manager. Lysianzus reminded her that it was a very old story. Didn't the girl remember it? Adelaide replied that she didn't know what he was talking about. Lysianzus noticed, although she looked a little different than last time, he thought she had taken some kind of miracle drug. Adele thought he had confused her with the same grandfather. Already out loud, she answered Lysianzus that the one he was talking about was probably the girl's grandfather. Since he passed away unplanned, this dungeon was inherited by her. Lysianzus replied that that's how it is. He also added that only someone in whose veins Harbazi's blood flows could open the portal to the dungeon, so he was mistaken. The girl replied that it was no big deal. The girl immediately started thinking about the fact that the problem now was that she needed to close big debts, but with the funds she had, she definitely wouldn't be able to do that. She was sorry that Lysianzus had found out about her master like that, but it was better to ask him to leave. The manager looked at the girl questioningly. Adelaide addressed him as Lishan and asked him if he could stand up first. She wants to thank him for looking after this dungeon, but she would like him to leave today. Lishan started asking a lot of questions about why this was so. Was there a reason for it? Maybe he had done something wrong. Adele stated that there was no way. The manager was surprised by her answer. Suddenly, the girl settled on the floor and stated that she just had no money to pay him at all. He asked her not to worry about it. He lived and worked here for a night's lodging and sustenance, and he planned to continue to do so. Adelaide was clearly taken aback by his words and mentally asked if he really worked without pay. Didn't he consider that exploitation? Suddenly, an idea came to her, and she asked Lysianzus how about becoming an official resident of this dungeon, and she would charge a pittance for living there. The manager, however, stated that he had no money. Adelaide grimaced at the fact that the manager seemed to be in the same position as she was, The girl stated that she wouldn't want to kick him out herself, but she doubted that they would be comfortable with each other, since they were strangers. She was not sure if such a small dungeon needed a manager. Already the manager himself replied confidently that in that case he would prove to her within 3 days that a manager was necessary. Lysianthus smiled sincerely. Adelaide saw this and thought that when the manager smiled, he was so handsome. However, the girl immediately faltered. She asked herself to stop and come to her senses. All the beautiful incubi smiled like that before they did their worst. But a handsome guy like him, who is more beautiful than all those incubi put together, suddenly offers to work for her without pay. It's all so damn suspicious. She thought about the fact that maybe if he refused the offer, he would just balk and not want to leave at all. For starters, she would pretend to accept the terms. Already out loud, the girl said that, well, he had 3 days, no more, no less. Lysianthus thanked her in return. The manager added that the mistress was probably very tired now, so she should sit down and rest. He would bring her some refreshing tea. Adelaide was dumbfounded to hear about tea, if it was served here too. This land cannot be called fertile, so even here tea is a luxury item. And is there really such a convenience as tea in the F-rank dungeon? Lishan remarks that they didn't buy the leaves from outside and suggests that instead of words, take a look in person, Adelaide. Taking hold of the door handle, the manager asked his hostess if she would go with him. They found themselves in a greenhouse that was clearly not short of plants. Adelaide was clearly surprised to find such a place in the F-rank dungeon. Lishan shared that he didn't really like to go outside the dungeon, so he had set up a place suitable for cultivation. Adele didn't understand how there could be sunshine in the greenhouse. Lishan shared that he had just installed it. When she saw the baskets of vegetables, the girl asked him if he had grown those too. The manager stated that yes, he had grown them himself. She was very surprised that he had built the place himself and was growing vegetables. She doubted that he was a middle-level manager. Lysianthus noticed that she seemed to have delayed the girl a lot with her stories. I apologized to her and told her to please come in. The girl replied that yes, she was coming in. In her mind, Adelaide asked herself to wake up, or she would drown in the soap. She added aloud that she would like to taste the tea that the manager had mentioned. Lysianthus answered kindly that yes, he would bring it right away. The girl sat down at the table, and the manager asked if she was comfortable. She added that since the furniture was very old, he would take care of it tomorrow. The girl was puzzled and asked if he wanted to make the furniture with his own hands. Lysianthus bowed and said that yes, there was nothing in this dungeon that his hand had not touched. Adelaide immediately began to ask him about various things in the house, such as the lamp, the vase of flowers, that bathtub. Lysianthus confidently declared that the lamp was his handiwork, the flowers he had grown, the vase he had made, and the bathtub he had made himself. The girl was puzzled by the manager's behavior and mentally asked what he was doing here. Lysianthus answered that it was nothing special, but that his abilities were meant for such things. She realized that he had powers. Everything was becoming clear to her now. There are powers possessed by magical beings of average level and above. Each has its own gift and its own limitations, and of course, the stronger the creature, the stronger its abilities. Adelaide has an average grade, so she doesn't have a single ability. Aloud, she replied to the manager that she envied him. Lysianthus smilingly replied that it was just a coincidence. Adele grabbed her head, asking herself to come to her senses. She needs to stop being jealous. She tried to set herself up that she needed to find his weakness, exactly the weakness. He may look perfect, but he definitely has a flaw. The girl's mind is brainstorming. Lysianthus is a man, a magical being, and that means the girl wondered aloud if he was a good cook. Suddenly, a table of food appeared in front of the girl. The manager shared that it was pasta with arugula, omelet with paprika, and iced tea with hibiscus. Tears streamed down Adelaide's face at the sight of the food. She realized it was the most beautiful food she had ever seen in her life. And in the Union, she had only eaten breadcrumbs like this. Adele twirled some pasta on her fork and put it in her mouth. It was like 1,000 fireworks exploded in the girl's head. The girl called loudly to Lishan. He inquired of the hostess if something was wrong. Adelaide placed her hand on his shoulder, saying that she was appointing him a member of the Greenville Dungeon for life. Lysianzus thanked her. Half an hour was enough for her. Lishan added that in that case he relied on her, his hostess. Adele responded by saying that she relies on the food, or rather on him. After she made Lysianzus her steward, time began to pass carefree. She has a top-quality meal every day. She sleeps in a custom-made bed 24 hours a day. Even the house is cleaned by Lishan, too. The girl laughed gleefully as she sat on a chair and sipped her wine. She started to say that if heaven exists, then isn't it here? But before she could finish, a letter suddenly flew into her face. She was shaken with anger, and seeing the male bird in her thoughts, she began to say that now she was his. But she did not finish. Lishan came up and asked if the girl had received the letter and who was the sender. Meanwhile, the steward himself was pouring tea. The girl replied that she didn't know and suggested that maybe Pipa did. Adelita opened the letters. In it, she was welcomed as a mistress. She was brought news from their accounting department of the Magical Union. This month, she must repay a debt of 4 gold coins. The girl panicked and trembled at such words. The letter went on to say that if the debt was not repaid, an employee would be sent to her. She thanked her for her attention and went to the manager and asked him what happens when the bank sends an employee to her because of debt problems. Lysiadus hesitated and replied that it was possible that the officer would at least cut off one of her arms. Adelaide realized that it was time to say goodbye to her carefree days. Right now, her life as a dungeon mistress would begin. Lysiadus was reading the inheritance papers and read a moment about a debt, about 660 coins. She remarked that she owed a good deal more than that. The girl apologized with pity. Lysian replied that there was something good. They took her age into consideration and lowered the interest rate a lot. If the girl pays the full amount slowly, there will be no problem, so she should not worry. The girl tearfully thanked Lysian for supporting her. She clenched her hand into a fist confidently, thinking that he was right. While she was snotting around, her interest would only grow. Since she was the heir to this place, it was her responsibility, and she was no longer alone. The girl declared that fine, and then it was time to start running the dungeon. She approached the manager and asked him if he would help her. Lysiadus smiled and confidently told her that, of course. She said that first she should take the scroll of the dungeon. A scroll appeared in her hands, and the girl was surprised that it was a scroll. Lishan added that the scroll belongs to the dungeon master. It's used to check the status of the dungeon or to register a rank rise. She told the girl to unroll it. The girl opened the scroll and was surprised. It said nothing special on it. Adelaide remarked that it was easier than she thought it would be. Lysianzus surmised that it was written that way because of the low rank of the dungeon. But if she were to raise it, new data would appear here and the overall view would undergo a major change. The girl replied that she realized there was nothing remarkable in the information about the dungeon. The dungeon's accumulation was 0. Adelaide was astonished because they could have left at least 1 bronze coin. The girl realized that there might have been money here, but someone had just taken it. For example, the girl gave a puzzled look to Lysiadus. After all, he had been living here all this time. Lysiadus immediately replied that for the record, no one but the owner had access to the finances. Adele awkwardly ruffled the hair on her head, saying she knew it herself. Did he really think she suspected him? The girl wondered if he could read minds. Lishan pointed out that the mistress had said she would raise the rank of this dungeon. Adele responded by saying that yes, she would try. Lishan added that she would then like to ask something before helping her. Suddenly, Lishan asked why the girl wanted to know. The girl noticed that he was thinking about something because she had been thinking about something for a long time. Lishan asked what it was about. Adele began to tell about a very large salary, better working conditions, and various benefits. She wants to run a dungeon that will have it all. Normally, dungeons charge a monthly fee to their residents. But if the rank of the dungeon is high enough and the income from the dungeon is corresponding, everything changes. It starts to drive out the ordinary creatures and attract strong ones to take their place. Then the goal becomes to increase the combat strength of the dungeon. Adele confidently stated that she would not do that. She shared with Lishan that this place will be a home for everyone who works here. That's the kind of dungeon she wants to create. Lishan suggested that she would need to reach at least rank B then. Adele replied that she didn't, and that her goal was S rank. After all, she has to pay off her debts somehow. Lysiadis remarked that an S-rank dungeon where the workers could feel at home sounded lovely. She extended her hand to the hostess and added that we must make Adelaide's dream come true. Suddenly there was a lecture from Lysiadis. She said that they should start then. He asked her to look at this dungeon information and asked her what she thought the problem was. The girl thought for a moment and confidently replied that it was in everything. Lishan replied that yes, she was quite right. The girl, meanwhile, was discouraged by his reply because she had just made a joke herself. Lishan continued that the biggest problem was the so-called accessibility. He asked if the girl knew how to profit from the dungeon. Adelaide replied that it was to receive rent or to punish the knights who came. Lishan smilingly replied that yes, that was it. The creatures from the underworld and the knights a few centuries ago accomplished the unbelievable. A spell called soul splitting was created. Then the knights split their souls and with these shards rushed to the magic tower, hungry for riches. Even if a knight dies, he loses only a part of his soul. And when he dies, he can be reborn wherever he wishes. In other words, if you don't use up all your soul shards, you'll be close to immortality. After that, the knights constantly reviving and coming back again caused a lot of trouble for the magic tower. Lishan replied that this was true, but fortunately the soul-splitting spell was created to fight the creatures of the underworld. That's why it doesn't work in the human world. That's its weakness. So if a knight dies in the human world, he can't be revived. Adelaide cheerfully asked why not just kick them all out into the human world and kill them. Lysian took the girl's point to be true, however. Didn't the creatures of the underworld think of themselves first? Mentally, Adelaide mused that teamwork had never been their strong suit. Lishan said idiots, so the second option was a dungeon. After they distribute various treasures and rare items to the dungeons, the knights are sure to come looking for them. That's when they start hunting them down. Dungeons that are worked hard on are promoted in rank, and their inhabitants are rewarded for their labor. Adele exhaled heavily, saying that as he himself knows, no knight has ever come to this dungeon yet. The dungeon is too far away, and it's not like they are rich in resources. The closest place that borders the human world is the most accessible to knights, is a place in the eastern part of Dathanos Mediar. Many amenities are provided for the knights there. There is even a neighborhood where people live. Even if you call out to your Greenville, a person won't come. This place has already become the most popular. Adele grimaced and asked where she was even going to get the money for this if she only had one worker in her dungeon. She realized that this was just a disaster. She stated that they needed to start by hiring new workers. Lishan remarked that the girl was so smart. Adele mentioned that if she increases the number of residents, she thinks it will help increase the rank of the dungeon. To increase the rank to F4, they need one occupant. Adele smiled, and holding the scroll in her hands, stated that it was so easy. If she rises in rank, she'll get money too. She'll save up quickly, though if you think about it, there aren't enough rooms. The girl laid her head on the table dejectedly. Lishan immediately handed her a stone, saying that he had a space expansion stone for this purpose, so the lady could use it. The girl immediately asked excitedly if she was allowed to use such an expensive thing, and he had said he was giving it to her, so she couldn't take it back, right? Lishan replied that he had bought it just in case he wanted to plant a big vegetable garden. He is happy to give it to the mistress. Here it came to the girl that if she just submitted it and covered the monthly fee, then the money would be enough for about a month. Lishan immediately pointed out that for the record, it was forbidden to resell an item in the magic tower. Adele immediately asked, did Lishan really think she would sell his gift? How can he say that? Lishan replied that it was just in case. The girl thought he could definitely read minds. Already a moment after using the stone, Adelaide noticed that the space had increased so quickly. When the dungeon gets even bigger, it will be possible to move through portals within it, right? Lishan replied that then it would also be possible to divide the rooms into living and battle space. The girl stated that was excellent. Then they should get into action quickly. She turned to Lishan and said confidently that she would go and bring the new members. He asked the hostess if she was sure she could handle herself. He asked her to be sure to call her if she got into a dangerous situation. The girl waved goodbye, telling him to just sit and wait for her. This time, it was her turn to work hard. Adele came to a village of magical creatures in the outskirts of Greenville. Flying through the streets, she inquired as to who she would offer to become a resident of her dungeon. She may be a Hoya, but she's still mid-level herself. La and Lysianzus seem to be mid-level too. Then, if another mid-level member joins them, it'll be good for them. Besides, their place is so nice now. That's probably where she would start the conversation. Adele stood up on the stump and shouted loudly, asking for everyone's attention. She claimed to be the mistress of the dungeon that is nearby. Her name is Adelaide. She came here to invite them to her dungeon. She was noticed by creatures in armor with blue fire burning instead of their heads. They realized Adele was a succubus and assumed she might be from Belial or Esperanza. Meanwhile, Adele continued that the first thing she would like to tell you about is the food that their chef prepares. She even made the sun inside the dungeon, so you don't even have to go outside, and it's only for 10 silver coins a month. The very creatures in armor began to lead the discussion, asking realistically if it was true. Adele meanwhile remarked that this was great, and everyone seemed interested. She asked for another moment of attention, saying that seats were limited, so they needed to sign the contract quickly. These creatures in armor immediately rushed towards the girl, jostling and claiming which of them was first. She asked them to line up. She would choose the strongest of them. Adelaide asked them to respect the line. Someone grabbed the contract out of the girl's hand. He began to read that it was a Greenville dungeon. Rank F5, no accumulation, no permanent members, and there were 6 rooms. In the contract, the description of the dungeon is on the very last page and is written in very small print. It's a creature in armor, swept by the fact that the location of the dungeon isn't great either. He doesn't think it can be called a good suggestion. Adelaide realized it was a failure. Someone started shouting that it was a scam, and if Rayam hadn't told her, none of them would have even noticed. Someone pushed the girl, asking how the succubus dared to cheat them. Someone caught the girl and told the others to stop. Why are they attacking her in the first place? It was their mistake that they were going to sign the contract without even reading it. The one who pushed her responded to Raham that it wasn't that. It was just that the creep was lying to them. Raham replied that he didn't like that word merswaka. He suggested that it would be better to talk business. The other stated that this succubus was lying to them, therefore. He didn't have time to finish, because Dell indignantly replied that she wasn't lying and everything she'd said to her was pure truth. Delicious food, a bath, artificial sun, everything. The same creature asked indignantly if the girl still objected. Rayam said, enough was enough. Putting his arm around the girl's shoulders, he told everyone to calm down. He would see the girl off and come back. Adele realized that this was all strange. Why is this Rayam helping her? They approached the ladybugs. Rayam told the girl to quickly get on the ladybug and leave. She thanked him and added that it must not have been easy for him to decide to help her. Rayam noticed that she thanked him, even though he had pointed out that part of the contract. The girl mentally replied that she was right, which of course made her furious, because how could one blow one's nose in almost cooked porridge? Already out loud, the girl replied that it was her own fault. Adelaide immediately added that she really had not cheated, and swore to that effect. Rayam thanked her for those words and replied that he too apologized for his friends. Adele remarked that the fool had been, even though he seems stronger than the other Durahans, he doesn't act arrogant with her. She thanks him once again for helping her. She thinks it is fate and asks Raham sharply if he wants to become a resident of her dungeon. Raham replied that he did not know. Adele was dumbfounded by his answer. Raham shared that he didn't really want to join the girl, immediately asked him to think again because they were really having a good time. Raham aroused the girl to a ladybug, and finally added that he would seriously consider her offer when her dungeon reached rank E. He asked the cow to leave. Adele asked him to wait and said that she would give her a discount. He could only pay 9 coins a month. Raham turned around and went the other way, and Adele was still shouting in his direction, asking what about 8 coins a month, but Raham waved silently. She asked him to listen and shouted sadly about 7 coins a month, and after she was chased out of everywhere. She's been stoned, told she's a fraud and should get out of here, called a bloody succubus, asked why she's still here. She was kicked out of the door everywhere.
The protagonist agreed, and Lanella rejoiced. Lady Nestor asked the saint if she was tired, and immediately began to say that she expected the same from her, for Emilian was the grace of God himself.
Handle herself. He asked her to be sure to call her if she got into a dangerous situation. The girl waved goodbye, telling him to. Suddenly someone appeared behind her back and began addressing her like a hostess. It was Lishan. She was sad about the situation and didn't notice him right away. When he came close to her, she noticed him. She asked at once what he was doing here, if he had come for her. She remarked that he called out to her so affectionately that she was even a little startled. Lishan shared that he was worried, since she had been gone for a long time, and suggested that they go home first. He added that he had also found another way to attract new members to their dungeon. The method was that they could attack the neighboring dungeons. Adelaide was shocked at his suggestion. Lycian mentioned that he thought it would be a good idea to take over Borak's dungeon, which was in Sherman. Adele said that she thought the manager was in favor of peace. Lishan smirked and said that when it came to magical creatures, they all wanted to get what they wanted at any cost, didn't they? In the next moment, Adele and Lishan had already approached the dungeon. The girl was surprised that they had already arrived. It was closer than she thought. She remembered something and turned to Lishan and asked how he was doing. The girl began to pose in front of him in her new outfit. Lucian replied that it was incredibly beautiful, turning to Mrs. Adelaide. He also asked if there was a problem. The girl looked at him carefully, mentally saying that he looked like the Lysiatus she knew, that she didn't understand what it was. Lysiatus shared that Borak's dungeon was mostly entered by getting caught in a scam. After forcibly signing a fake contract, the members of the dungeon live like slaves. It is said that because of the incredibly strong guards, no one has even tried to rebel. So even if they take over this dungeon, their reputation won't get worse. Yes, and he had a good feeling about it. She confidently suggested to her mistress Adelaide to find and invite one person. The girl noticed that at that moment he didn't look like his usual self, or maybe it was just her imagination. She answered Lishan okay and asked him if he remembered what he had to pretend to be for secret entry. Lishan embarrassedly replied that he was an incubus. But that wasn't all, and Adele asked what else. Lishan complimented that he was the girl's brother. They were met by a man. Bowing, he greeted them, introducing himself as the manager of Borak's dungeon. She said she would escort them. The girl thanked him sweetly. She mentally thought to herself that no matter who said what, clothes were the best way to make a good impression. He motioned for them to pass. The dungeon was perfectly clean, all things sparkling. Looking at it, Adele wondered mentally how much it cost. The manager of this dungeon asked if the girl liked it. He remarked that Borak's dungeon was only decorated with the most expensive items. Adelaide looked at the fountain and realized that if she stole even one, she could cover her debt. Suddenly, they met a man who laughed merrily and said aloud that it was really a succubus. This man is precisely the master of Borak's dungeon, Borak himself. He mentally noted that the girl was also so beautiful. This was beyond his expectations. The manager immediately asked them angrily what they were standing for. They should bow quickly and greet the master. The boys mentally wondered if this was Borak. The girl said it was nice to meet you and introduced herself as a succubus, and her name was Adelaide. Next was Lysianzus, introduced himself by name and said he was an incubus. The girl shared that she used to work for the Morpheus Alliance, and her brother worked for the Regis Alliance. But they left there. They were looking for a new place to work, and luckily came across Borak's dungeon. Although the girl had heard of the place before, it was much more beautiful and picturesque in person. Borak folded his arms across his chest and replied that of course there was no dungeon in the area that could compare to his. He answered that he was surprised that the girl used to work in Morpheus. The girl sighed and added that yes, the union was famous, but she admitted that it wasn't a good place to work, so she definitely wanted to go underground. The girl added sweetly that especially if it was going to be a dungeon like Borak's dungeon. Borak was fascinated by her and thought about how who would have thought such a beautiful succubus would crawl into his arms on her own, and such a huge one at that. Suddenly, Lishan entered the conversation with an intimidating face, saying that they would like to submit bids and asking if it was possible. Borak replied that she didn't even know. He could take the succubus, but he would have to think about the incubus. The girl was surprised by the words and said that it couldn't be. In that case, there was no way out, and she suggested that her brother come back. Borak dejectedly asked to wait for her and asked why she was leaving. The girl said that she needed her brother, that they were family and therefore should live together. Borak indignantly remarked that they were adults and could live separately. Adelaide continued that she was bored without her brother, so she couldn't live without him. Lishan replied that she couldn't live without her little sister either. Borak trembled and swallowed nervously and said okay, and offered to make a contract. He thought there would be a job for this incubus. The girl was glad that it was over. Already out loud, she said happily that was great, as she thought Borak was very generous. He showed them the contract and said, well, they need to sign it soon. But the girl interrupted him, saying that there was one more thing. Of course, before signing a contract, there was a probationary period. She had heard that it usually lasted a week, so she asked Borak how long it lasted. Borak obviously didn't expect the probationary period question. The girl said confidently that yes, she should try to live here before signing the contract. She asked if they didn't have one. Then the girl said, as Adelaide was about to leave, Borak shouted that of course they did, for 3 days. A sinister grin appeared on Adele's face. She thanked him. The manager led the way to one of the rooms, saying that the succubus could be located in this room, and the incubus room was at the end of the hallway. That was all. Adele reached out and added that since everyone had gotten away from them, they could look around here for a bit. She asked Lishan whose red energy he felt. What does he look like? What is his name? Lishan replied that he didn't know what he looked like. He could only feel him. If the girl sees him, she will definitely realize it's him. Mentally, Adele wondered what kind of nonsense Lishan just said. Adele said that she understood him, and since this dungeon is huge, they should split up. Lishan said that yes, they should split up, but if the girl got into danger, she should call Liaitsan right away. Walking down the corridor, Adelaide thought about what Lishan had told her about the danger. She thought about how even if she called on Lishan, who had powers that were only useful in domestic matters, she replayed in her mind the moment when she was sitting behind bars and saw Lishan and said that she knew it. He had come to save her. And Lishan shows her his handcuffed hands and replies that he was caught too. She realized it was better not to get to that point. There was no way she was going to call him out on this. The girl wondered where she would start, how intriguing it all was. But no sooner had the girl finished speaking than she received a smack on the head. She asked, who was there? Someone pointed out that she couldn't even dodge one of those. Too weak. It was an army of skeletons in armor. One of them asked if she was definitely a succubus. She held up a hand in her hand and thought shocked, wondering if a hand had just flown into her now. She threw the one who had launched a hand at her head, screaming for him to take it back. The skeleton called her a coward. The girl indignantly asked what they were doing. She was actually new to this dungeon. The skeletons asked how such a weakling could be a member of the dungeon. They were against it in general. They started yelling at the succubus Adelaide to get the hell out. No need to be an embarrassment to the others. Knuckles were flying at her. She yelled back that it hurt and asked them to stop throwing. The skeletons replied that they were throwing just enough to hurt the girl. They called her a dumbass, asking her how she liked the taste of bones. They ran after her, yelling for her to get out now and to keep her nose out of here. The girl yelled back at them to stay away. Stopping, the skeletons swept up as the succubus was finally leaving. They shouted at her to stay out of their sight. The girl ran away from them, changed her stride, and exhaled heavily. A bump appeared on her head. She thought about how these guys were so mean. She assumed that it looked like succubi weren't really liked here either. The girl clenched her hand into a fist, realizing that now was not the time to lose confidence. She didn't come here to make friends, and she was used to this kind of attitude. She stood up on the spot and shouted, "Go, Adelaide, go!" She needed to get her strength up. She exhaled and said fine. Now, with renewed vigor, she could start exploring the dungeon. The girl confidently walked forward. Somewhere in the basement, a guy with fiery hair was chained up. He was breathing heavily, and Adelaide meanwhile that she would find for sure what she came for. Looking around the dungeon, Adelaide noticed that the rich people lived very differently. She wondered how many stones they used to make the space bigger. She felt like she had walked around here all day, but hadn't even looked around half of it. Adela's day consisted of first visiting the trap room, then fleeing from the skeletons. The further she goes into the depths, the more closed portals she encounters. But there is still nothing noteworthy here. Suddenly, she heard the sound of a portal. Turning her head, she saw a large red stone. She was indignant that, well, there it was again, closed again. She thought about the fact that she had come all this way, it would be far to come back with nothing. She mentally said that if she could just walk in there. Poking her finger into the stone, suddenly the color of the portal changed from red to blue. Adelaide grabbed her head, thinking she must have broken something. It was closed, after all. Then it came to her. Wasn't this a chance? She hadn't opened it on purpose, and there didn't seem to be any alarms. She looked around and realized there was no one around. Adelaide said that she was right, and that she'd had enough hesitation. She stated confidently, only forward. Reaching out her hand to the stone, she fell into a portal. She didn't realize what it was. It was hot. This portal was different from all the others. She flew out of the portal and landed on her knees. Breathing out, she realized that she had managed to get through, but she wondered what this place was. Suddenly, she was called out. It was the same guy with the fiery hair who was chained up. He asked the girl loudly who she was. Adelaide was shocked and wondered who else it was, if it was a magical creature. She noticed the red horn and suggested that could it really be a demon? It is not a medium or high-level creature. Demons hold the highest position in the hierarchy of the creatures of the underworld. She did not understand why on earth it was in such a place. The demon continued to yell, asking if the girl couldn't hear him because he had asked who she was. Adele had imagined demons to be calm aristocrats who dressed in a suit and with a glass of wine. However, her perceptions are shattered. She noticed one detail. This demon only had one horn, so it's probably unlikely he's a demon. Meanwhile, the demon continued yelling, asking if the girl could hear him. She realized that she might not be afraid of him because young people were now somehow inserting artificial horns, so he must have done the same. At that moment, Adelaide smiled, and the demon indignantly asked her why she was laughing. The girl answered him that she was not laughing. He thought he imagined it. He indignantly and angrily stated that this was another brazen lie. He asked if she too was Borak's puppet. Perhaps he had sent her to kill the demon. Adelaide stated that she was not a puppet, but would soon become a member of this dungeon. The demon was angry to hear this and asked, it turns out she hadn't even joined yet. He also asked how she was able to go through the portal. The demon knows that one cannot enter here without Borak's permission. The girl stated that it opened on its own, and she herself only came to see what was here. She asked the demon why he was locked in a room with nothing in it. He must be a criminal. The demon angrily replied that because of Borak's deception, he had been imprisoned for about 100 years. At least 100 years, to be exact. Adelaide hesitated for a moment. She was surprised that 100 years he had been locked up here. She didn't like the way he was acting, but she felt a little sorry for him. She thought it might be worth asking him and helping him out. She told the demon out loud that she would ask him only one question. Does he want her to release him? The demon shouted, "What the hell is this nonsense? Isn't the girl Borax 6? The girl indignantly replied that she said she wasn't. Why does he not believe her at all? The demon shared that Adelaide looks like someone who is always getting into all sorts of trouble and not at all someone who has everything with ease. These words angered the girl, but she realized that he was very much right. Adelaide exhaled and turned around and said that if he didn't believe it, he didn't have to. Then she would just go. Then suddenly the demon asked her to stand, to wait, and he said it in such a voice from which the girl stood in a stupor. The girl did not understand why she stopped. Did the demon use the ability? She has some kind of strange feeling. Its eyes are different from those of other magical creatures. It was as if they could see through. She asked if it was true that she would set him free. The girl replied that if he didn't tell Borak what she had done. The demon replied, "That fine," and let her free him. Adele thought to herself that he was not only asking for his release, he was also acting arrogant. Bowing to him, she answered as he would say. Adelaide noticed that those chains didn't look so strong. Adelaide wondered why the demon hadn't broken them himself. The girl reached out with her hand and touching the chains, she felt as if she had been electrocuted. The girl settled to the floor after the shock. The demon realized that if the girl was buying it, she wasn't really working for Borak. Adelaide sat on the floor and tried to move away from that blow, shivering. She asked the demon what it was. The demon clarified what meant. He explained that they were chains that contained angelic power. He asked if she was a fool to grab them with her bare hands. It made Adelaide angry. The demon knew, but let her touch her anyway. The demon suddenly inquired if it was true that the girl was a succubus. Adele answered him loudly and vehemently that yes, she was a succubus, and so what? The demon replied that nothing, and he just wants to show his mercy. So he wants the girl to approach him and he will give her his power. He can't take her by the hand. The girl was stunned by his words. The demon added that if she didn't come up, it would be worse. She had to get out of here. Then the girl realized that he again told her to approach him with that voice, and her body started to move towards him. She realized that she had all the powers in the world. She put her hand in his, palm to palm, and her fingers intertwined. The demon added that she should take it as an honor, for not everyone could take his hand. However, Adelaide remained silent at first, and then with an angry face said that they would look into it. Adele shares that the reason why she hasn't absorbed other people's energy until now is because she thinks absorbing energy without other people's knowledge is unethical. But now the situation is dangerous to her life, and also the demon has authorized her to do it herself, so she had no reason to refuse. Adele began to lead her hand from his hand to his shoulder, touching his arms. The demon blushed and asked her what she was doing. The girl answered him as well, so he took it as an honor, since not everyone can kiss her on the lips. She sat on the demon's lap, saying that she was from Morpheus's alliance and he was once the strongest. The girl took the demon by the chin. He was clearly nervous, but Adelaide said he shouldn't worry. She would drink every last drop, absolutely everything. The demon was clearly also eager for that kiss. As they kissed, Adeline took a moment to notice that it was incredible. Completely different from just holding her hand, so strong is this energy. She realized it was trouble. It was probably because she hadn't eaten in a while and couldn't stop. The demon was sweating all over and was clearly very tense. He jingled his chains and thought about if only his hands weren't shackled. Adeline broke the kiss. The demon was breathing heavily. Adeline remarked that it felt good now, and she could now finally gather her thoughts. Standing up, the girl added, "Well then, she would probably go." The demon was dumbfounded by the girl's words. She asked, puzzled at what she had said. Adeline calmly replied that she didn't think the demon would be able to help her, and it had had enough. The demon became angry and shouted how could she just leave so easily. Adeline happily apologized and said that it wasn't her problem, rightly so. Adeline turned around and said goodbye, wishing him a good time. The demon was still puzzled, asking her to wait. He called out what her name was. The girl once again asked what her name was. She sweetly stated that her name was Adelaide. The demon repeated her name and said his name was Caladium and the girl should remember it. The girl said, "Okay, and see you later." The girl walked to the portal and mentally repeated that he asked her to memorize his name, making her laugh. And she doesn't want to. Walking back outside, she stretched and happily remarked on how invigorated she felt. She mentally wondered if the demon must be very strong. She wondered what his powers were. From just one kiss, so much energy. This bright red energy, like a bursting flame. That's when the girl realized, flames, red energy. She remembered that Lishan had talked about having a good feeling about it, and he had ordered that they find and invite one person. She fell to the ground and started crying that this was the end. She thought he was average, no less. The girl was saddened, because what a good impression, because she was just being awful to him. She mentally wondered how she could talk to him differently. He was the first to humiliate her, and he's probably killed a lot of magical creatures. She was sure that when Lishan heard the whole story, he would definitely side with her. Just then, Adelaide heard someone talking about a succubus. Someone asked the others which one of them would be throwing dice at the succubus tomorrow. Peeking out from around the corner, she saw the skeletons. They were making plans to kick the girl out again. What a nuisance. One of them remembered something and asked if it hurt very much. Adelaide didn't know what they were talking about. The other skeleton asked if he was asking about how much it hurt to get a bone. He complimented that it seemed yes, he threw it too hard. One of them added that they had no other option. Another said that was true. If Borak binds her to this fake contract, they won't be able to sleep well because of the guilt they feel for her. They need any way they can to get her out of here. One of the skeletons remarked that this was true, and it seemed he was just a little scared. Tomorrow, he would be just as rampant. The other replied that no. They were very grateful to him anyway. After all, he had done the hardest work. Adelaide, standing around the corner, began to shiver. She tearfully suggested that could there really be such kind monsters? She remembered the annoying, strong demon and said no thanks. And that's just the kind of cuties they'd expect in their dungeon. Adelaide tore out of her seat, mentally asking her to wait for the skeletons a little longer. She'll be sure to take them to Greenville. We move the next day. Lishan turned to his mistress, saying it was time for her to wake up, for it was morning. The girl was puzzled, for if it was morning, why was it so dark? Lishan pointed out that it was because there was no artificial sun. He added that he had brought food from the canteen and she should eat. When she saw the food on her plate, she grimaced and remarked that this was how they fed their members. Lishan replied that he thought their cooking situation was better. In this dungeon, being able to cook such a dish is enough to get a job. Adelaide was indignant at how so. How could it be so? Lishan remarked that it seemed to him that she had been very tired yesterday. He waited for her, but when he got to her room, he saw that she was already asleep. The girl laughed awkwardly, saying that's right. She was so tired yesterday because of that search. She remembered that she had decided not to tell him about her meeting with Kaladi, but she seemed to be able to tell. Lishan smilingly asked if the girl had rested well last night. He also noticed that she had a particularly cheerful expression on her face today, as if she had sucked the energy out of someone. Adelaide wondered why Lishan was so guessing. She wondered if she should tell it like it is. Angel Adele thinks she should tell, and Demon Adele thinks she shouldn't. But the girl thought about the fact that suddenly something would go wrong and he would be disappointed in her. Adele thought hard and decided it would be too childish to lie or hide anything. She said out loud that she would tell Lishan everything. Suddenly they were disturbed by the Baraka dungeon manager. He apologized for disturbing them, but he had something to tell her. The girl was glad to see the manager appear. She replied that everything was fine and asked what was wrong. The manager replied that the owner asked for a private conversation. She was surprised to hear about a private conversation. She added that then she and her brother would pack up and come over now. The steward replied that no, the master had called only her, Mrs. Adele, to this meeting. Lishan gave the steward a serious look, and Adelaide wondered why it was only her. The manager added that Mr. Borak was waiting for her in his room, and that was the end of it. Adelaide wondered, a private conversation. Something wasn't right here, but she couldn't refuse. The girl said there was no choice, and turning to Lishan said she would be back soon. Lishan nervously replied that the mistress may not go. He didn't think Borak would kick them out if she refused to see them in person. Adele got up from the bed and replied that he would hardly appreciate it, and Lishan shouldn't worry because she was very fast. Lishan wanted to object, but the girl replied that it was fine. She added that if she got into danger, she would just call him. Right. Lishan smiled and said that he didn't think she would say that now, but yes, he understood her. If she called for him, he would be there in a flash. When he arrived at Borak's house, he announced cheerfully that Adelaide had come. The girl wondered why he was so happy. She felt embarrassed. Already aloud, the girl wished Master Borak good morning. He also greeted her and said she looked so pretty today. Taking a seat on the bench, he patted the seat next to him and said she should sit down first. The girl remarked that there was nowhere to sit. Borak replied that if there was nowhere to sit, then she should sit next to him. The girl mentally grabbed her head, saying that wasn't what she meant. She mentally encouraged herself to endure. Just endure. She had to be strong. Taking a seat next to Borak, she thanked him. Borak said with a frantic look on his face that so-and-so had called her to make sure of something before the contract was signed. The girl asked, puzzled as to what. Borak continued that since she wanted to become a member of his dungeon, he needed to know what she was capable of. He shared that he had contacted the Morpheus Alliance recently, but did she know that their information was not to be blindly trusted either? And as a host, he should check it out thoroughly. He said how about she shows him everything herself? Borak grabbed the girl's arm, much to her puzzlement. The girl awkwardly asked what he was talking about, since there were other creatures here, and she was embarrassed. Borak told her not to worry, it was just security, and in case something went wrong. The girl thought that she seemed to have underestimated this guy. She tried to force herself to think, because she couldn't let this happen to herself. She mentally advised herself to say again that she was embarrassed and run away. But she told herself that no, there was a guard in the corner. That means he thought of everything in advance, and then called her. Then maybe she should abandon the idea of taking over the dungeon. But no, this was all after the fact. And if he found out about the lie, Greenville might be in danger. Adelaide was trying to figure out what to do. Meanwhile, Borak continued that come on, they should check things out with the girl. Letting go of her hand, he reached for her face. She wanted so badly to punch him in the face right now, but she didn't think she had a chance of overpowering him. She tried to reassure herself that she just had to be patient now. Suddenly Lishan appeared and said that no, the test Borak was talking about would be done by him. Borak was outraged and asked how he was here. Lishan asked if it wouldn't be fair to test his abilities too, since as the eldest, he would do it first. Borak replied that he didn't need to, if he just had to leave. Lishan clarified how it wasn't necessary. Borak indignantly replied that it was not his type. Lishan clarified that he was sure he wouldn't regret it. Maybe it was just a warning, and it would be better to be sure. Borak was very nervous, and replied that enough was enough and asked him to please leave. Lishan replied that he was sorry, but he would obey Borak's orders. Borak added that he should leave faster. Adelaide looked at it perplexed, wondering what she had just seen. Suddenly, Lishan held out his hand to Adele and said, "Come on, they should go." She reached out her hand to him and put it into Lishan's hand. The girl followed the manager and realized that he had saved her again. He must be angry that she didn't listen to him. Maybe she should apologize. Suddenly, Lishan turned to the hostess and asked her with a menacing face why she didn't do anything then. Adelaide shared that it was because she didn't know whether to run away or still do as he asked. She added that it was okay, for she was a weak succubus, so she was already used to this kind of thing. But when Lishan appeared, she was very surprised, for she didn't know he would save her like this. Lishan spoke to her again, and told her that she must not tolerate being forced to do things against her will, or being dishonored in front of strangers. She should do only what she wanted, what she wished for, and what she dreamed of, only that.